Hello everyone, Thersites here with WTFGAS. We're about to embark on episode 2, where I do a tier ranking of all of the Medal of Honor games and all of the Battlefield games. I've had a long history with Medal of Honor ever since it first came out in 1999, and although the franchise has been more or less dead since 2012, I still consider myself a fan. A few years ago, I went into a GameStop and requested Medal of Honor Airborne, and the clerk literally just stared at me and then said, I have to be honest, I never thought that I would hear anyone ask me for that game. So apparently, my tastes are somewhat unusual. Nonetheless, I'm going to be ranking both the Medal of Honor and the Battlefield games by the quality of the single-player campaigns. I'm not a big multiplayer guy. That's not to say that I don't mess around with multiplayer from time to time, but usually what happens if I play a first-person shooter is I play through the single-player campaign, and then I'll turn on the multiplayer, dick around for a couple hours, and that's about the extent of it. The one exception is a game we'll get to, Battlefield 1, where I took the time to download all of the DLC, and I've spent quite a bit of time with the game. But for the most part, I play through the campaign, and then I move on. So I have very little interest in what the multiplayer modes have to offer. I will mention it where relevant, but for the most part, not really my concern. So again, I guess that means that I'm a little out there, but that's okay. When it comes to video games, I am a bit old-fashioned. So, Medal of Honor, the reason why I want to cover it is because I have a long personal relationship with the franchise, one, but also it is historically significant because it more or less created a subgenre of first-person shooters, and I believe that it also is one of the 4 games most responsible for creating the modern first-person shooter experience. The 4 games that I would highlight, Wolfenstein 3D / Doom, both of them are candidates. Some people forget about Wolfenstein and only talk about Doom. Other people talk more about Wolfenstein. Doesn't matter. Either way. The second one in the genealogy is GoldenEye 007, which really got multiplayer going. The next one is Medal of Honor, and then Halo. Between those 4 games, I think that you have all the ingredients for every first-person shooter that has come out. No exceptions. Medal of Honor tends to be the redheaded stepchild of that group, and for that reason, mostly I want to really highlight this forgotten series. I will not be ranking add-ons or expansions. I didn't play most of them, and most of them are not really single-player in nature, so I don't care. When it comes to Battlefield, I will only be covering the console games because those are the only ones that I have personally experienced. I don't really do a lot of PC gaming, and the couple of exceptions that I did make were for Medal of Honor games because I couldn't find anything on console, and I decided to seek out some PC options. I was not able to finish the campaign for either Allied Assault or Pacific Assault, or whatever it's called, because I didn't have the right computer, and I also downloaded it for a computer that died before I finished the campaign. So, bully for me. When it comes to Battlefield, it's also lumped in here because I wanted to talk about it, but I don't have enough to say to justify an entire tier ranking video. Plus, Battlefield is also owned by EA, and after EA took possession of Medal of Honor, it then started to put the later Medal of Honor games on the Frostbite engine that Battlefield uses. So I figured it's only fitting to put Battlefield on the list as well. Speaking of EA, fuck them, they killed Medal of Honor. Medal of Honor is supposed to make a comeback this year. I'm still not going to hold my breath, but we'll see, and I'll believe it when it happens. Now, if that's out of the way, let's get to the actual ranking. First up is the game that started it all, the game I consider to be one of the 4 foundational pillars upon which all first-person shooters of the last 20 years are built. That is Medal of Honor for PlayStation 1. This game came out in 1999, and it was one that I was very excited about. I read about it in magazines, Next Generation, and also GamePro. And I have to say, of all the games that I've been hyped for, this one probably delivered the most closely to my expectations. Actually, one of the other ones that delivered according to my expectations was The Outer Worlds last year. I rarely get games at release, so I was pleasantly surprised by that. But with Medal of Honor, it really was a game that I felt was geared to my interest. You get to shoot shit, which is cool. It's set in a historical setting, World War II. I was increasingly interested in that topic as a teenager. I was 13 when this game came out. And it was unlike anything I'd experienced up to that point. You could aim. There were weapons that were real. So it was a step beyond Doom for me. And I did not have an N64, so I'd never really played much GoldenEye aside from a handful of times here or there at a friend's house. And for me, GoldenEye was actually never that appealing because I think, as I've mentioned, I'm very much in the single-player modes, not as big in the multiplayer. And as someone who is not a big Nintendo fan, I've not really been able to get into any Nintendo console since the SNES. I love SNES, but when it comes to the later Nintendo machines, I find the controllers to be damn near unusable. And N64 for me was when I really started to sour on Nintendo. But that's a bit of an aside. So anyhow, Medal of Honor, it was a cinematic production. Steven Spielberg was associated with the game. Each mission began with a briefing from a guy who was an OSS colonel. As Lieutenant Patterson, you were recruited by the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA, and you were sent on missions by yourself behind enemy lines to gather intelligence, commit sabotage, and naturally kick a lot of ass. Any game where you can shoot Nazis has a certain appeal, and Medal of Honor was the first game to really scratch that itch in a way that was somewhat realistic. Sure, Wolfenstein did it before, but Medal of Honor did it better. With Medal of Honor, the graphics for the time were quite good. I was pretty impressed. You could see enemies at a distance, even if the draw distance did sometimes diminish detail to the point where things looked like shit. Enemies up close were a little blocky, but that was okay. The controls were functional, and in fact, I will tell you that if you are either very rusty with 5th generation games, or you're a younger gamer and you've never played anything from the PlayStation or N64 era, it is much, much easier to step into Medal of Honor and figure out what to do and play with success than it is to pick up GoldenEye 007 on N64 and get underway. By the time you get to the next game, they've basically figured out the modern control settings for a first-person shooter. But it's almost there. I would say this is 80 to 85% of the control setting that you have now. It's still playable. Obviously, it has aged, but I love Medal of Honor. The stage design is great. The music is excellent. You have really stirring soundtracks, sort of orchestral music. It's very good. It's something that could have easily gone in something like Saving Private Ryan, which came out the same year, or maybe the year before. It's really, like I said, this is one of the pillars of gaming history, and I put it in S tier, and I think it's a pretty easy decision. The sequel to Medal of Honor came out a year later. This is effectively just a Medal of Honor game with new levels. Medal of Honor Underground. This time we follow Menon, who is a member of the French Resistance. So we have a female protagonist, and it links in with the story of Jimmy Patterson because she is doing missions around the same time, and she actually briefed Jimmy in some of the original game's missions. So now we follow the exploits of Menon, and she does a lot of the same things that Jimmy does. She controls the same, but some of the missions are a little different. And if anything, there are some small refinements that make this game a little easier in terms of the experience for the player. There is a little bit of stealth in this game where you pose as a photographer and you try to assassinate Rommel. I love that mission in North Africa. It's pretty innovative. And probably my favorite mission of the entire franchise is Manon's last mission, where you are sent back into Paris, her hometown, the place where when the game began she lost her brother to the Nazis, and you're there to make sure the Nazis don't blow up Paris. it has this emotional resonance that was not common in games back then. And I'll never forget the briefing where Colonel Hargrove, or whatever his name was, says, "It's time to go home, Menon." So it has just a certain power that most first-person shooters don't have, because most first-person shooters are very much action-oriented, and it's all about just getting in there and kicking some ass, or pure revenge, or whatever it might be. But this one had just that extra little layer of depth. I appreciated that. But the game didn't really make any major innovations. I'm not even sure if it introduced any new weapons. One thing that was cool is there is a Nutcracker Mode at the end you can unlock, where you go to rescue Manon, I think is Jimmy, and you fight some really weird opponents, nutcrackers and things. It's the example of bonus material. I rank Medal of Honor Underground as an A. It's not quite an S because it isn't as innovative, but it is still a damn good game, and in a few ways it is better than the source material. And that's, of course, Medal of Honor Underground for the PlayStation 1. We'll get to the abomination that was the Game Boy Advance port in just a minute. But is there anything else to say about the game? No. One thing that is worth noting, I have sort of a sub-interest in games that come out late in a console's life cycle, because I've noticed that consoles in their last years get a lot of shovelware, a lot of games that developers don't put a lot of time or effort into. But Medal of Honor Underground is an excellent, what I like to think of as a Twilight entry into the PlayStation 1's library. So this is definitely in the category of a PlayStation 1 hidden gem. Next up, we have the attempt to port a 3D first-person shooter onto the Game Boy Advance, a 16-bit system with capabilities similar to that of a Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo. Predictably, the results are catastrophically horrible. Medal of Honor Underground for Game Boy Advance is one of the ugliest games ever made. Somebody, I think it was CGR Undertow, made a hilarious review where he's just sitting on the couch traumatized by the experience of playing this piece of shit game. The controls are horrible, the graphics are god-awful, the programming is flawed on every level. You can shoot guys through the wall because you can see them through the wall. They can shoot back at you. Everything is just a blotch of color. There's not really any definition to anything. It's hard to navigate because everything's blurry. It hurts your eyes. There's not a redeeming feature to this game. This is the definition of an F. And I hate to give this an F because this game is very ambitious in what it was trying to do. But this is a case where they really needed to exercise some quality control, and they didn't. Whoever was responsible for the release of this game should never be allowed to work in the gaming industry again. This should not have been attempted in the first place, but the fact that it not only was attempted, but completed and released, absolute stain on gaming in general. And I played a good amount of Game Boy Advance games. It's probably the only portable console that I genuinely like as a whole. There are a handful of games for other Game Boy platforms and for Game Gear that I like, but for the most part, I was never all that into those consoles. That being said, Game Boy Advance, this is a stain that will never come clean from the soul of the Game Boy Advance. Chronologically, the next game to be released was a step forward in terms of the generation of gaming, and this was Medal of Honor Allied Assault for the PC. This would have been around 2001 or 2002, so it is a contemporary of systems such as the PlayStation 2. This is right as the Dreamcast is dying out, by the way. Medal of Honor Allied Assault is a game I've not spent a ton of time with. I did get it to run on an old computer, and I was having a pretty good time with it, but it crashed and the computer died with it. Nonetheless, I can tell that this was a quality game, and I know that it has a sterling reputation, which is well earned. Medal of Honor Allied Assault is an A, one of the better games of that particular time. Next up chronologically was the attempt to get something similar to Medal of Honor Allied Assault on a home console. Medal of Honor Frontline was first released for the PlayStation 2, and then it was ported to the Xbox and GameCube. The difference in the various ports is substantial enough that I'm going to rank the 3 ports separately. First up, the PlayStation 2 original. The game was very clearly optimized to run on the PlayStation 2. While the PlayStation 2 is, in many ways, a less powerful gaming console than even the GameCube, and clearly less powerful than the Xbox, the PS2 version of this game is by far the best. The textures are the smoothest, the game runs the most cleanly. It is here where we get, for the first time, the modern first-person shooter setup. You have the option of doing what they call MOH Classic, which is the PlayStation 1 version where you basically use one stick, or you can use the new setup where you have both sticks and you aim with the right stick and turn. I think that this is one of the more underrated experiences of the early 6th generation. Unfortunately for Medal of Honor Frontline, it is overshadowed by games such as Halo on Xbox. That being said, Frontline was one hell of an adventure. The stage design here was a huge step forward. Stages were more open, they were larger, and often there was a much greater sense of humor at work. Now, Underground had a sense of humor as well. There's one level where you can shoot guys in suits of armor who pose as just random suits of armor at a castle, and then it turns out that there's a guy inside and he's going to attack you. Or maybe it's supposed to be one of those jokes about the Nazis trying to learn black magic, so a knight charges you. Either way, there is humor in the series, at least in the second 2 games on consoles. Frontline also has you infiltrate a German headquarters at one point, and when you go into the kitchen, the chefs start throwing knives at you. There's another mission where you have to infiltrate another house where Nazis are hanging out, and you fight officers in their bathrobes while they're sipping cognac or whatever. You also have to smash up a bunch of clocks to find hidden keys and passcodes and documents, and basically you're just forced to go and smash all of them to find it. That part I found somewhat obnoxious, and it took me a while to figure that out, but eventually I did. It's a good game. I like not Allied Assault, but Frontline. One of my personal favorites of that era. It is not as innovative as the original, and it's probably not quite as quirky as Underground. Nonetheless, it was a big step forward. It also introduces a few stages where you see some squad action. For the PlayStation 2, this game is an A. And it helps to make up for the fact that PS2 didn't get Halo. When it comes to the Xbox version, it should come as no surprise that it's quite competent. Xbox was pretty much the ideal system at the time for first-person shooters. A tradition that Xbox has carried on to the present, where, if anything, its versions of any given first-person shooter will be just a little bit better than the PlayStation equivalent, if there's a difference. That being said, it was a port of the PS2 version, and as such, it was a fairly lazy effort. Clearly, there was an attempt to cash in on the audience of Xbox gamers, but because there are fewer Xbox players than, say, there are PS2 players, the developers didn't put as much effort into the game as they should have. Therefore, the graphics are just a little worse. And given that the Xbox has more power to work with, that's inexcusable. Nonetheless, it is not a bad game, but I have to go with a B. If you had both consoles back then, you should have played it on PS2. If you didn't, the Xbox version is fine. Now, where these developers really fucked things up was with the port to the GameCube. The GameCube port was botched horrendously. So as I mentioned, both the Xbox and GameCube versions are ports to the PS2 version. However, with the GameCube version, it's not so much that you can notice a little bit that the graphics aren't what they should be, but you notice it pretty severely. The game is much boxier. There are a lot of little glitches. There's more screen tearing. Everything just looks worse. There's no attempt to optimize or to clean it up, and it kind of destroys the experience. And as I mentioned, I am not a fan of Nintendo's controller decisions since the 16-bit era. I guess you can make an exception for the Game Boy Advance, but for the most part, the GameCube controller is not a fun way to play any first-person shooter. It's a little too stiff. There aren't enough buttons. I had a lot of trouble trying to adapt to this game on GameCube, and this is after having played this game through to completion on both PS2 and Xbox, and having done both of those games within the last 5 years, by the way. So I remember a lot from the stage design, but I was not able to use the GameCube controller effectively enough to navigate through the game. I ended up rage quitting after just a couple of levels because it looked hideous and the controller was not giving me what I needed to complete the game. If you are adapted to the GameCube controller, you can probably eke out a victory. That being said, this is clearly and far and away the worst way to play this game. It is a D. The next game to be released, if I'm not mistaken, is Medal of Honor Rising Sun. This is an attempt to put Medal of Honor in the Pacific Theater of War, and this game was released for the PS2, the GameCube, and the Xbox. I have played both the PS2 and Xbox versions. Unlike with Frontline, all of the versions look just fine on their respective consoles. I've looked up footage of the GameCube game, which I do not own, and it looks fine. That being said, I probably would not play this on GameCube after my experience with Frontline. Nonetheless, I've tried it on PS2 and Xbox, so I can speak to what the game is like. Somehow this game looks worse than Frontline. I'm not sure how, but it does. In terms of the settings that you experience, you start out at Pearl Harbor and you go up on a deck gun and fight the Japanese air fleet as it's coming in. That's a pretty cool touch. You have to run to the surface. It's cinematic for the time. It hasn't aged super well, but that's to be expected. Nonetheless, it does get you in the mood to play a Pacific war game. Pretty effective opening level. And then things kind of go downhill from there. This game is very difficult to navigate for whatever reason. These games are linear, but for some reason, Rising Sun's maps are hard to figure out. The action is slow and uneven. The weapon variety is pretty limited. The game just doesn't quite feel as responsive, even though it's clearly the same engine. I'm not really sure what's going on with this game. Personally, this is one of the games I hate the most in this series. To be fair, I'll give it a D. It is playable, but it is a huge step down from Frontline. And I'm not sure exactly how that happened. On the other hand, of course, it is even between the three consoles it was released for, so I guess that's something. That being said, this is a game I've tried to get into on many occasions because I want to beat all the games in the series, and I'm not going to waste any more of my time at any point in the future playing this game. It's just not worth it. Stage design is poor, as I said. Actually, you know what? Fuck it. This is an E. This isn't a D. This game sucks. It's not the worst I've ever played. It's not the port of Underground for Game Boy Advance, but while this game might have its defenders, those defenders are wrong. This game sucks. Next up is the other game for the Game Boy Advance in the Medal of Honor series. That is Medal of Honor Infiltrator. This game is a top-down shooter, which is more adapted to the constraints of a 16-bit handheld, and as such, it is infinitely superior to Underground for GBA. That being said, this is not a great game. There are people who think that this is one of the hidden gems on the console. I'm not among them. The difficulty is way too high. And unlike any respectable shooting game, this one has you out in the open blazing away, but without having the firepower to dominate. So think if you made a Mercs clone, but your guy had no firepower. That's what this game is like. Not a big fan. I know other people are. However, there is a learning curve. You can get better at the game, but the only way you should ever play this is if you're really looking for a Game Boy shooting game. For the most part, if you're looking for a good shooter, rule number one is don't play on a handheld. So, Game Boy Advance Medal of Honor Infiltrator, I'm ranking as a D. Next up is Medal of Honor Pacific Assault. Unlike the earlier Allied Assault Frontline pairing, this pairing worked in reverse where the console version was released first and then the PC version. Pacific Assault was far and away superior to Rising Sun. It built on what Allied Assault did, and 3 years later, it looked much better, and the stage design was really good. Now, I've only played a little bit of this game because of computer problems that I've mentioned before, and once again, fuck you EA for trying to set up Origins, which is different than Steam and makes it harder to access EA products. Hopefully, one day, EA will make their stuff more easily available, and I will be able to play this game to completion. Based on what I have seen of the game, however, I think that it also belongs in the A category. Very solid outing from Medal of Honor, and one of the stronger games in the franchise so far as I'm concerned. After Pacific Assault, we get European Assault. Allied Assault already was a game focused on Europe, but European Assault also focuses on Europe. There's been a major gameplay change this time, however. In European Assault, you control different points on the map and hold them, and you have some freedom in terms of which objectives you take first. This game was released on PS2, GameCube, and Xbox. I played the PS2 and Xbox versions, and I've beaten both. This game is pretty damn tough, however. It also doesn't have the charm that Frontline has. There's not a lot of goofy stuff here. It's a little more squad-based, and it's a little jankier than, say, the Call of Duty games at the time, such as Big Red 1, which was also released the same year for the same systems. So, it's not bad, but it also lacks the presentation of the earlier games. It seems like it's trying to do something different. It's trying to become more of a generic squad shooter. There's a lot less story, and you don't really have meaningful characters. So it's not a bad game, but it almost feels like an unrelated game that was then slapped with a Medal of Honor sticker. I'm going to go with the C for European Assault. It's not a bad game, but it just doesn't quite have the right feel for a Medal of Honor game. Rising Sun actually does feel like a Medal of Honor game, it just sucks ass. But European Assault, not so much. Next up is Medal of Honor Heroes. This game came out on the PlayStation Portable. I don't think that good first-person shooters can happen on handhelds, and this game helped to confirm that opinion. This game is better than it should be, but it is still rough. The AI in this game is complete shit. It's basically a Nazis run around like morons and you shoot them down as they run in front of you in circles kind of game. It is, I guess, fine if you just want to shoot Nazis on the go, but again, if you're looking to do any serious shooting, you should probably get an actual console rather than relying on a portable. For me, Medal of Honor Heroes is a D. Next up, Medal of Honor Vanguard for PlayStation 2 and Nintendo Wii. For whatever reason, EA decided to create Vanguard to cash in on the popularity of PS2, and rather than put Airborne on the new console, the Wii, they instead put Vanguard on Wii as well. And the reason, of course, is that the Wii was massively underpowered, just like all of Nintendo's consoles the last 3 generations in a row. But that's neither here nor there. Cheap fucks. So, Medal of Honor Vanguard is another example of a late in the life cycle release. And like a lot of games released late in the life cycle of a console, it is not one of the classics of the PS2. That being said, it really isn't terrible. I was skeptical when I picked it up used back in around 2011, 2012. I thought that for sure I was not getting a game that would be very good. But I was pleasantly surprised. Now, this game wasn't Frontline, but it felt the most like Frontline of the successor games on the PS2. It also does preserve some of the feel of the newer Airborne game. A lot of times when you're playing these late releases on the older consoles, You're playing something that is designed to entice you to want to upgrade because it gives you just a taste of what you could be experiencing. And that was kind of the case for me with Vanguard. It was just good enough that I could see the potential of the Airborne concept. And so, later, when I did upgrade to Xbox 360 in 2015, yeah, I played things later, Airborne was one of the first games I sought out, and that's when I had that awkward exchange with the dude at GameStop. So, there you go. Anyway, Vanguard for me is a C. I believe it might have been released at a discount. If it's full price, it should probably be a D. When I got it, of course, it was used, and I probably got it for maybe $7 or $8, so no complaints for me. This is also around the same time that I was playing Call of Duty World at War Final Fronts on PS2, so I did play a lot of those late generation games at the time. And the PS2, for context, was my primary gaming system from the time I got mine around 2001 or so, all the way until 2013 when I picked up an original Xbox. But even then, really until 2015 when I picked up the 360. Currently, in case you're wondering, as of early 2019, I have an Xbox One. Anyhow. Next up, Medal of Honor Airborne. This was the first of the Medal of Honor games to be released for the 7th generation consoles. It had the misfortune of coming out the same year as Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, which is another game that some people think is yet another major step forward in first-person shooters. I actually think it's more or less just a refinement of what Medal of Honor had already done. Nonetheless, it is definitely in the running, and if someone wanted to add that to my list of the 4 pillars and make it the 5th, I would not object. That being said, Medal of Honor Airborne is not nearly so innovative as Modern Warfare. It's not as fast, it's not as good in most ways. The level design is not as interesting, and there's not really much of a story. You're just one of many paratroopers, and you automatically regenerate until you fulfill all your objectives. It has sort of a sandbox feel, however, and while I was initially underwhelmed by it, over time my appreciation for the game has increased a little bit. I think that of all the games in this series, this one is the most maligned unfairly. It's really not that bad of a game, it just isn't a good game. So, I would like to restore it to its proper mediocre status. Because that's really what Medal of Honor Airborne is. It's a mediocre game. Not a bad one. One of my complaints is that the final level tries to go back to Medal of Honor goofiness without doing it successfully. It just becomes frustrating. You have to drop into a flak tower, and now you fight dudes wearing armor with chain guns, and you literally have to unload an entire clip into their faces to kill them. That's usually more of a problem with the Call of Duty games, especially the PS2 era Call of Duties, where if a guy was carrying a Panzerfaust, you needed multiple headshots to kill him for whatever reason. Medal of Honor Airborne did commit that sin, but I think it's an okay game. Graphically, not as good as contemporary Call of Duty Modern Warfare, but respectable-ish. In terms of weapon variety, it was somewhat weak, but the weapons looked and felt good. Level design was a bit mixed, although I kind of enjoy that semi-sandbox feel to it. I'll go with a C for Medal of Honor Airborne. I can't justify going higher. Another fun story about that, after I embarrassed myself asking for it from a clerk at GameStop, I was then away from my home during a power outage. And when I came back, I discovered that someone had broken into my apartment and stolen my Xbox 360. The game in there was Medal of Honor Airborne. Since then, I had to get a new Xbox 360, which ended up being a much older model with a smaller hard drive, so I have a less good 360 now. And I also reacquired Airborne when I found it later on my own. I'm not going to ask for it again after that experience. And yeah, I did beat the game the second time around. The first time when it got stolen, I was on the last level, and I hadn't finished it yet, so I did not actually complete Medal of Honor Airborne until this year, even though I was on the verge of beating it in 2015, around October or so, when it was stolen from me. So of all the games, actually, yeah, that's an interesting side note. The only game that someone has ever stolen from me is Medal of Honor Airborne. Alright, fucking weird. At least it wasn't something truly good. Okay. Next up is Medal of Honor Heroes 2. A few years ago, I decided to pick up a used Wii from Half Price Books because I was looking for something that could run Netflix, and I wanted to put it with my old CRT in my bedroom at the time. The Wii fulfilled that function, and I got one that was backwards compatible with GameCube, so I got two consoles, and I got both of them for 20 or 30 bucks. Pretty sweet deal. And then I started collecting some games, and one of the games I picked up, this is also, by the way, how I played the Medal of Honor Frontline on GameCube. One of the other games I picked up was Medal of Honor Heroes 2 from a used game store. I have to say I was pretty disappointed. I didn't know what to expect from the motion controls on Wii. I was able to complete the game, but it took a lot of willpower. This game very much looked exactly like a PS2 game, so I was pretty underwhelmed by the power of the Wii. And after completing this game, I decided that there's no reason for me to ever play a Wii game to completion again. And for the rest of its life, the Wii just served as a Netflix and occasionally a YouTube machine. Since Netflix service has been canceled on Wii, it is currently unplugged and collecting dust. Anyhow, this game sucks. It is rough. There is an arcade mode where you kind of play it more like Time Crisis or Virtua Cop. I think it's a cool mode, but unfortunately, the motion controls are not great, and there's not an option to hook up and play with a regular controller. It's functional, however. I'll have to give it a D. I can only imagine what the other Wii ports of the various Medal of Honor and Call of Duty games are like. I will not be trying them, however, and it was effectively Call of Duty's Heroes 2, which cured me of any curiosity on that front. It was a rough experience, and I'm surprised that I lived to tell about it. Next up is Medal of Honor, the 2010 reboot, which used the Frostbite engine from the Battlefield games. The main problem with the single-player mode is that it's short. However, it's sweet. This is a good first-person shooter set in the modern period. Medal of Honor decided to imitate the success of Call of Duty and move into the modern period, and it did so successfully. This game is set in Afghanistan. The levels are well designed, the graphics are great, the controls are great. There's even a vehicle stage where you play as an Apache or some other kind of helicopter, and you provide air support. The controls there work excellently. You also control a C-130 at one point. And if there's one thing I've noticed about first-person shooters from the Xbox and Xbox 360 era, is that vehicle controls are normally there just as a form of torture. They put all the effort into the first-person shooting, and then when you get in a vehicle, they essentially put the thumb screws into you and torture you until you can get through that stage. But Medal of Honor on the 360 and the PS3 did not do that. I first experienced this game on PS3 because my sister had it, and I happened to be with her for a while, and it looked great. She didn't let me play it because she's not really into sharing, but I did get to see it, and later I got to experience it for myself. It only runs about 6 hours, sometimes only 4 once you understand the campaign, so the second time I played it through, it only took me 4 hours. That being said, it is still an excellent experience. I just wish it were longer. And although I have not talked much about multiplayer up to this point, this game was notorious for having a solid multiplayer mode that no one ever used. So it was there, but people chose not to use it, and it also did not really sell very well. When people think of Medal of Honor, they're looking for a cinematic World War II experience with the orchestral music and all that. Medal of Honor 2010 does not have that. I'll give the game a B. I really wish it was longer. And I really wish that EA had stuck with that formula, or reverted perhaps to the Frontline or original strategy. Next up is Medal of Honor Warfighter, the game which effectively murdered the franchise. I don't know what went wrong here. I don't know how you take a game such as Medal of Honor 2010, make a sequel which essentially uses the same engine and a lot of the same story and characters, and completely and totally fuck it up. So with Medal of Honor 2010, the story's serious. There's not a lot of playfulness, but the characters at least are somewhat interesting and they seem realistic. They seem like actual Special Forces guys. We don't learn a lot about them. It's not a very touchy-feely game. It's not dramatic like the Call of Duty Modern Warfare games, but there's a little bit of personality there. Medal of Honor Warfighter takes the same characters and then drains them of all life. It does do some graphical upgrades, but the controls are vastly worse for whatever reason. In terms of stage design, it's also shittier. So, the first stage is very hard to get through. You'll notice the game's not very responsive. And then you have a little section where you control a remote control car, and you use it to gun down some enemies. Then you get to a stage where you have to snipe some people from a distance. These sniper controls are so bad that 45 minutes into the game, unless you can figure out how to operate these fucking insane controls, your mission is over. I have tried this game on both the 360 and PS3 on every difficulty setting, including easy. I cannot get through that sniper section. I cannot figure out the physics that they're trying to use. The physics are completely inconsistent. I thought if you figure out the wind direction and then adjust by aiming a little to the left or right, that should be good. It works sometimes, but not always. Aiming up or down, same thing. There's no consistency with how the sniper physics works. And to beat that section, you have to get lucky. And it's a long section that keeps going and going and going. You have to make shot after shot after shot. So that is just pure misery. I don't know what comes after that, but I don't care. This game is a complete and total failure. I have one friend who also plays a lot of first-person shooters, and he told me once that the only game that he ever got when it was new and took it back within 2 days was Medal of Honor Warfighter. For me, this is one of the games I personally hate the most in this entire world. If I had to make a list of the games that I wish never existed, this game would be on it. So when I said fuck you EA, when I think of why EA sucks, not only do I think of Origins, which popped up on my computer even though I haven't used it in years. Thank you, EA. Here it is. Origin. Yay. That's because I got one of the Command & Conquer games and now it doesn't run, but I still have this bullshit program. Well, let's not get into that. Medal of Honor Warfighter. Complete piece of shit. No redeeming qualities. I honestly hope that everyone associated with the project has never gotten a job since. Fuck them all. Now to move on to Battlefield. This is an in-house EA project, so unlike when they acquired Medal of Honor, they put effort into these games. I do resent the fact that the focus on Battlefield has killed off the beloved Medal of Honor franchise. Nonetheless, the Battlefield games themselves are mostly good. I've not played the PC versions, such as Battlefield 1942. I've heard very positive things, and maybe one day I will get around to playing them, but that day is not today. Let's focus instead on the console releases. Battlefield 2 Modern Warfare was released both for the older generation systems, such as the PS2 and Xbox, and also for the Xbox 360 in 2005 or 6. I played both versions. We'll start out talking about the PS2 version, which I played a little more than the 360 version. Excuse me. The PS2 version is a respectable effort for an aging 6th generation console. Battlefield 2 Modern Combat allows you to switch around from character to character, and it has a nice open feel to it. It definitely feels different than anything else that was available at the time. So in a way, I have the same feeling I have about it that I had about Medal of Honor Airborne. It just feels unique, and I like that. It's not the best, but at least it's different. You also can control a variety of vehicles. Now, a lot of these vehicle controls are complete dog shit. Flying an F-18 is basically impossible, but the tank controls aren't that bad, and the infantry controls are okay. Decent weapon variety, the stages are fairly large and open. I never really got the hang of the game. It wasn't quite for me, but I did appreciate that they were doing something different. The PS2 and Xbox version is a C from where I sit. However, Battlefield 2 Modern Combat on the Xbox 360 was a botch job. This game should have been significantly better than the version on the aging consoles, but it wasn't. It controlled worse. And I think it actually looked worse, at least from what I remember. I don't remember there being much real difference in the graphics, which in itself is a damning indictment. The controls are certainly worse, and the game just seemed in general buggier. The 360 was a pretty easy console to develop for, from what I understand, so I'm not sure why they were having so many teething problems with the new console. Now, granted, new consoles are often difficult to work with, but again, the 360 was noted for being an easy console to work with. That's why, despite being less powerful than the PS3, it often had the better version of games that came out on both consoles. Battlefield 2 Modern Combat for the Xbox 360, I would rank as a D. It is, in my opinion, worse than the older generation model. The next game to be released on the home consoles from the Battlefield franchise was the original Battlefield Bad Company. You follow around a misfit squad of 4 as they collect gold bars and engage in open-ended missions abroad. This game has a sandbox feel that is somewhat comparable to Far Cry, but in many ways I think it's the spiritual successor to Medal of Honor European Assault. It's much more competent than European Assault, and of course it looks and plays better. The weapon variety is also improved. It's set in the modern period, and I love the characters here. I don't remember their names right offhand, but I do remember some of the lines. It has lots of jokes, and I did laugh at a lot of them. That being said, this is an example of a game which has not aged well. I don't think I could go back and play this again. When I acquired this game in 2015 or 16 and played it for the first time, I'd already tried the original Modern Warfare, so I was aware that what I was playing was dated. By the way, this game came out a year later. Yet, I still enjoyed it. I liked the sense of humor, I liked the slower pace, I liked the more deliberate nature of it, the fact that you can approach the objectives in any order you like. I probably won't ever replay it, but I do have some fond memories of the game. For me, Battlefield Bad Company is a C. By the time I tried it, the multiplayer was long dead, so I never got to try it. I imagine it might have been decent, though, given the size of the maps and the options for various vehicles you can control. Next up is a purely multiplayer game, and I included it to be a completionist. This is Battlefield 1943 for PS3 and the Xbox 360. This game is pretty good, from what I can gather. Currently, there aren't any people playing it, so I have not been able to find any matches and really run it through its paces, but it seems like a very good game. So if you have it on Xbox 360, log in sometime. Maybe let me know in the comments, and maybe we can play this shit sometime. Please? So I can't rate it. That being said, all the reviews I've seen made me excited, and when I found it was $5, I bought it just a couple months ago. Haven't got a chance to play it, but yeah, it is on my console, my Xbox One. I'm ready to play it anytime anyone else is, so let me know. In 2010, Battlefield Bad Company 2 came out. This game has significant improvements over the original Bad Company in terms of gameplay and in terms of smoothness. The action is faster. The storytelling is just as good, if not a little better. However, the openness of the original Bad Company is lost, and it feels a bit more linear and traditional. I will acknowledge that it is objectively better, but subjectively I don't like it quite as much. I would have to go with a C for it. The graphics are a bit improved. The original Bad Company doesn't look as good as this game. Bad Company 2 also has better set pieces. The level design is less innovative, but a little easier to figure out. There's a lot less walking for no reason between far-spaced objectives. Pretty solid game, though. And again, I had fun with the story. Just like with the original Bad Company, I most likely will not replay this game. If I do, I will figure out a way to stream it, though, because I like the jokes in it and the storytelling's fun. But if I'm going to play an open-ended game like this, I will try to play one of the Far Cry games. I played Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon a couple years ago, and I had a blast with that. And I would like to play more Far Cry games because I really enjoy that engine. I also really love the Sniper Elite games, which also have some openness to them. Next up is Battlefield 3. This game is one of the favorites of people who really like Battlefield. Personally, I do think the game is good, but I think that this game is criminally overrated. Most people I know who are in the Battlefield would say that this game is perhaps the best in the series, at least the best console version. I disagree. I enjoyed it less than Bad Company and Bad Company 2. There are objective improvements in many ways in terms of how it feels and how it looks. That being said, the story is significantly worse. There's a lot less humor. The characters are less interesting. And in general, I just wasn't a fan. At least not the same way I was of the Bad Company games. This is also an example, one of the few where I can point to and say that the Xbox 360 version is definitely better than the PS3 version. I've tried both. If you have to play this, go with the 360 version every day. Battlefield 3 for me, I'm going to go with a C. It's solid, but it could have been better. And if I had segregated these into Xbox 360 and PS3, I'd probably put the PS3 version down in the D. Next up is Battlefield 4, the first game to be released on the new systems, the Xbox One and PS4, and a game which was also released on the 360 and PS3. I have played this game to completion on both the Xbox 360 and the Xbox One. There's not a lot of difference between the two, by the way. And this is another example of when you have a game coming out for an outdated console and the developers actually put a respectable amount of effort into it. So the 360 and PS3 versions of this game are very solid, but of course the Xbox One and PS4 versions look a little better. Battlefield 4, I also experienced the multiplayer. Before we get into the single player, I'd just like to say the multiplayer for Battlefield 4 is still active, and it's actually pretty solid. This game, I don't think, gets recognized as often for its multiplayer, but it's pretty decent. That being said, I enjoyed the campaign mode. The characters are a bit bland. The dialogue is not nearly as crisp as Battlefield Bad Company 1 and 2, but it's still pretty enjoyable. A lot of the levels are pretty memorable, especially the level where you break into the hotel in China. The last mission is also pretty memorable, where you have to make a decision, and this determines who lives and dies in a literal sense. Battlefield 4, the campaign is one that I enjoy enough that although I've already played it twice, I will definitely play it again in the future. Pretty good game, solid campaign. I'm giving it a B. Next up is Battlefield Hardline. I think this is another game where my opinion is in a distinct minority. Most people are not big fans of Battlefield Hardline, and it was something of a trope back in 2014 or 15 when the game was released to talk about it being a shameless cash grab and talk about how it sucks. I actually liked the single player in this game, and I also liked the multiplayer. I played this game on both the 360 and the Xbox One, so not only had I played it before I got my Xbox One, I deliberately went out and found this game and bought it for the Xbox One, and I did not regret that choice. The game has a nice story to it. You are a cop who's trying to bust some other corrupt cops. You have non-lethal options. And you are on the run from the law. So it very much is different than the games that have come before. There's also a level where you're hanging out with some sort of right-wing separatist group out in Idaho or somewhere. There's a good deal of variety in that sense, and while the game is basically the same game as Battlefield 4 but with a different story, it is refreshing to have a completely different setting. When I first heard about what this game was about, I was very skeptical, so when I picked up the Xbox 360 version, I expected to find complete dog shit, but what I found instead was a pretty solid game. For me, Battlefield Hardline is a solid B. I enjoy this game quite a bit. And it's another one that I will definitely play again someday. Next up is perhaps the most well-regarded of the Battlefield home releases. Console, not home, sorry. Battlefield 1. The first and so far most important of the games covering World War I as in the first-person shooter form. Battlefield 1 came out in 2016, so 100 years after some of the more famous battles of World War I, including Verdun. The campaign takes place in a number of different settings from World War I. The controls are great. Battlefield had been quite refined by this time. There are significant gains from Battlefield Hardline. Tank controls are actually good for a change, so even though you're controlling something which is literally unwieldy, it feels kind of right. Aviation was in its infancy, yet the airplanes in this game control in a way which feels right. The single-player mode especially, the planes control well. You follow different protagonists in different campaigns, and you learn about the tragedy of World War I. The game takes itself seriously in a way which works. It shows you the horror of war. The introduction is brilliant. You play as random characters who run around on the battlefield and inevitably die. Then you see that they all died very young. Some died a little younger than others. But you see that World War I was essentially a huge waste of human life. The game does not shy away from that. It also shows you a wide variety of settings. You play in the desert with Lawrence of Arabia. You play in the Gallipoli campaign. You play in France. You play in Italy, in the mountains. And you follow, sometimes, characters who lost someone. So in the Italian campaign, for instance, you see the story in the eyes of a person who's supposed to function as your grandfather. And he's telling you about how he lost his twin brother in the war. So, a lot of games that try to take themselves seriously come off as too serious. 2010 Medal of Honor, if anything, was a little too serious because it kept talking about sacrifice and honor and all of that stuff. And while it didn't go too far, it did border on it at times. Battlefield 1, I think, struck the right chord. And I also have to give this game immense credit for being a game about World War I, a massively neglected topic in gaming. The DLC for this game, unfortunately, is all multiplayer related. You're just unlocking new maps. But I like the multiplayer in this game more than I do in pretty much any other game that I played for multiplayer. And of all the games that I have, this is the only one that I've spent maybe 20 or 30 hours playing in multiplayer. I really enjoy playing as a tail gunner in the aviation scenes where you can get in a bomber or whatever. And I also love that you can call in blimps and some of the other weird bonuses you can get. So, I like this game a lot. I would rate it as an A. Pretty damn solid. And altogether worth playing. If you haven't played this for whatever reason, I recommend it. Next up, and lastly, is the controversial Battlefield 5. Many conservative YouTube gamers went online and bitched about how this game is an SJW whatever. And the reason they did so is because the mission by Allied commandos in Norway to take out the Nazi nuclear program was substituted for a teenage girl on skis in Norway fucking shit up. So yeah, it's not historically accurate but it's also a Battlefield game. There's only so historically accurate you can be. And let's face it, the World War II genre is oversaturated. A lot of games take this extremely seriously already. It's good to have a little bit of playfulness thrown in here and there. Not everything has to be dead fucking serious. And I think Battlefield 5 is serious enough. That being said, this game is not Battlefield 1. It just isn't as good. The level designs are not nearly as good. There's a little bit of openness in the levels where you play as the girl in Norway, but for the most part, the game is more linear than your normal Battlefield fare. I've not played the multiplayer for this, but I've heard it's not that great. The single player was kind of mediocre. I'm sort of leaning toward a D, but I think realistically it's more of a C. I'm going to go with a C for Battlefield 5. The campaign kept my interest while I was playing, but I don't really desire to play it again. And if I look back on the memories I have of playing Battlefield 5, I greatly enjoyed... Well, yeah, actually, looking back, I think I enjoyed Medal of Honor Airborne more than I enjoyed Battlefield 5, just in terms of sheer enjoyment. And while Bad Company and Bad Company 2 are flawed, as I mentioned, and they feel dated and a little stiff, I very much enjoyed playing those games. With Battlefield 5, there were times when I enjoyed it, but at other times it felt like a bit of a chore. There was one scene where you wander around in the snow and you have to not freeze to death, or maybe that's World War II. I think it's Battlefield 5, though. Anyway, it was okay, but not much more. Probably won't play Battlefield 5 again, at least not anytime soon. Those are my thoughts on the Medal of Honor and Battlefield 5, Battlefield games. Do you agree or are you wrong? Let me know whatever opinions you have in the comments down below. And after this, I will go to look at Call of Duty games and give a tier ranking of those as well. I will record that directly after this video, but I won't be posting it for a couple of days, so be on the lookout if you enjoyed this video. Peace out.